Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. I hope you've been watching the several part episodes of assembling and resurrecting this 1996 Vespa ET4. So this wasn't ever sold here in North America, but we've been slowly getting it all back up in the roadworthy condition. So you can see I got the bodywork all apart. The last hellacious episode was getting the brake system all working. That's very important. It's exciting to get a motor running, but to get the brakes going, that's really important. So the brakes are all good. Last couple things before we just put all the handlebars back together, the glove box back on. You know, if you saw in the first episode getting the switches working, some of these switches were kind of not working so good. So I'll show you how to change out these switches. They're very inexpensive on the Vespa scooters to replace these switches, so we'll change those out. You see the clock battery's not working, we'll pop a new clock battery. Maybe the clock will still work. Sometimes those clocks are just shot or they got so much corrosion from the dead battery. We'll determine that shortly. And a very important matter that we got to take care of. Dun, 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 dun. There's a dent in here. So we're going to try to pop that out. I'm no dent wizard by any means, but I'm sure you could find some other videos on how to magically pop out dents, or they usually refer to it as paintless dent removal. You can hire a professional to do it, but I'm just gonna get medieval with it. I'm gonna just give it a tap and see if that dent pops out. So that's the first order of operation. Let's get right to it. So we're just gonna get medieval with it. I got a bronze punch that's got a nice kind of rounded mushroomed head on it. And we're gonna get centered right in the middle of that dent and give it a tap and see what happens. And by no means, I'm no professional at this, but I assume we'll be able to get it much better than what it is right here. So you guys are on the front, you'll be able to see how it looks, and pretty much I'm getting that punch right in the center, and we'll see what happens here. So I'm just gonna give it a nice tap. And I can tell it didn't really pop by any means. It probably bounced a little bit. There's the side effect of giving it a try. It just chipped the paint. Kind of a bummer because I won't be able to get that paint. Maybe I should have just left the dent alone or left it to a professional, somebody who knows how to pop a dent. But at this point, we're committed. And of course, if you do it with a hammer and dolly, you're really going to damage the paint from the backside. I'm sure there's a lot more technique to this than the medieval tactics I'm using right here. But as easy as you think it might be to pop a dent out, sometimes it doesn't go so good. Well, the majority of the dent is out, but now we got some little paint chips. Well, we can try to mix up some paint, match something up. Maybe we'll touch it up down the road. So another item that might be common to change, especially if the scooter is going down and slid out. There's a little dent right there as well. This trim is usually pretty scratched up. It kind of protects the bodywork a little bit. And all you gotta do is just kind of peel it back when the glove box is off, and it comes right off. It should normally be kind of a silver color. Over the last 20 years, it's kind of seen some sunlight, and this is a combination of both aluminum that's coated with a plastic, and the plastic is kind of yellowed a little bit, and now it looks kind of gold. I actually think it looks kind of cool, so I'm gonna just leave it alone. But originally this was like silver. You could still readily get this trim along with these little stainless steel end caps right here. So when I first got the electrical system working, I know for a fact the horn and even the start button were working intermittently. And obviously the more you cycle them, the more it wipes the electrical contacts, so they start working. But if there's corrosion on them, sometimes there's no amount of like cleaning that you could do to get these buttons working. They're very inexpensive. We have all these buttons available with the exception of this headlight on and off switch, which still works, only found on the European market scooters. In the North American market scooter, you'd find an engine kill switch, like a red switch, and we of course have that readily available. Another thing you can see that's not working on this dash is that little clock. And it's just like your old Casio watch. It runs off a little clock battery. So 494521-BAT is the Scooter West part number for that little LR43 clock battery that installs from the backside. So we'll go ahead and give it a try. We'll try putting a new clock battery in there and see if we can get restore the operation of the little clock. If not, it's definitely not the end of the world, but I do know there's going to be 3 switches I am going to replace. The turnstille's working very nice. If you do need a turntable switch, we have those always available on the Scooter West website. Original Piaggio part, 294723. It's pretty much the same switch used all the way up to 2018. The Sprints and Primaveras, of course, use a completely different assembly. But the switches we are going to replace are the headlight switch, which is 294877. We're going to go ahead and replace the start button, which is 293549, and along with the horn button, 293550. So it's one number after. Pretty easy to change out. So flip this assembly over. You see the turnstile switch actually uses screws to bolt it in place, but the other switches are just held with tabs. And you see how much corrosion there is in that switch from all these years. Of course, you could try to clean it up, but what's the point when the switch is not that expensive? So just go ahead and push these little tabs and the switch will just pop right out. So it's pretty simple to change out, and just rock it right out and you pull it out. So then once you get the new horn switch, so pretty simple, you got the brand new horn switch. Make sure you install it with the correct orientation up, and all you do is snap in place. So keep in mind, GTSs and LXs, they use like a rectangular switch, while these ET4s and the early GTs use these round switches. So there's 2 different variations of the horn and the start button, depending on the age of the scooter. So for the start switch, pretty much the same routine, just pop those tabs. And the switch will come right out. And you probably use a little bit larger screwdriver than I'm using, or even the pry tools I've used in past videos. There's something that gets a little more leverage on those tabs to kind of get them, and then you can just work the switch right out. It pops right out. So go ahead and pop the headlight switch out. Just on each side of the switch, you just push the tabs with any sort of tool, and then we'll take the switch and pop the new one in place. It feels nice. And the turnstile switch we're going to just leave alone. If you want to change the turnstile switch, it's 2 screws. You got to take extra care removing those screws. They are threaded into plastic. If you break these bosses, it is possible to put a screw all the way through the plastic to hold the switch in place. Alternatively, you can replace this whole entire back half, but of course it's painted the same color as a scooter, so got to keep that in mind. So the last thing we're going to tackle is replacement of the clock battery. So you see that little cover right there? Go ahead and wiggle the little plastic cover out of the way. And in there is a little cover. You'll take a flat bladed screwdriver and unscrew that little cover, and we'll try putting a new battery in there. So we'll go ahead and engage the screwdriver with that little plastic cover, and probably turns about 1/8 of a turn. You want to get something a little smaller and pry that cover off, just like that. And it looks like it might be missing the little, there's usually a little metal, a spring metal tab that actually holds the battery in place. It's not 100% necessary, but it's not present here. And you can't really get those parts separate. We'll go ahead and pry the battery out, give the speedometer a little tip, and the old battery will drop right out. You want to check these contacts, make sure they're pretty clean. They do look pretty clean. It doesn't look like that battery corroded all that bad. And we'll go ahead and drop the new clock battery in place and hope for the best. So we'll go ahead and use like a tool to kind of pop the battery in place, or you can even put your finger in there. And at this point, look at that. The clock is magically working right there at 12 o'clock. So I think we're good. We'll go ahead and put the little cover back in place. It's kind of hard to see the little slot. Just drop that in place, and then you can kind of tighten that. Just about 1/8 of a turn, put the cap in there, keep moisture out of it. And look at, we got a clock again on a very old scooter. So it's kind of like an old Casio watch. It doesn't look like the buttons are working that well. So I might have spoke too soon, but sometimes you can get in there with a, oh, look at that. I don't really care about the date, but I'll set the time. It's 8:23. I don't really care about the AM part of it. So the first button goes between hours, minutes, month and day. And once you kind of go through the set and the colon's flashing, your clock is set. So look at that, we got a clock that's still working. That's pretty magical. So the last switch that was kind of working intermittently was the front brake switch. Just has 2 terminals that pull right off the switch. I put the old brake switch onto this new master cylinder. There's obviously some corrosion in there. You can replace it with 582-838. Depending on your year, they do have some switches that have a connector on them versus these 2 little quick connects. So this is the newer style switch that's used on most Vespas, all the way back to some of the older ones. Like a PX would use the same kind of switch. And it threads right into this little cavity right here. You might hold the lever to make it a little easier. And make sure it's just hand tight. You don't need to tighten with any sort of wrench. Go ahead and make the 2 connections. And at this point, we're gonna go ahead and put the handlebar plastics back on. And we'll make sure the scooter still starts and all our electrical stuff works. It should work much better with the new switches. So we'll start with all the connections on the left side. So the 2-pin connection is obvious. It only goes on to your horn switch. The white connection always goes to your turn signal switch. And the 3-pin connection that's red, has a red housing, goes to your headlight switch. And that's been carried over even with the newer models. Now we'll move on to the connections for the speedometer. Well, the mobilizer equipped later ones actually have 3 connections, but these have 2. You've got to take extra care making these connections to this printed circuit board that's on the bottom side of this speedometer. And at this point, we can make the last 2 connections. Pretty self-explanatory. You got a 2-pin connection for your start switch and this 3-pin connection for the headlight switch. But in many markets that could be, or the US market one, it would be a kill switch, but still a 3-pin connection. So at this point, we'll kind of position the handlebars back in place. You got this connection for your headlight, keep that out of the way, and then you got your speedometer drive. It's a mechanical speedometer drive found on all these older Vespas. Of course, some much newer stuff's all electronic. So we're just go ahead and thread that right into place here. And at this point, we probably start the scooter up. Get that all back in position. You can see these bosses need to line up with the tabs on the handlebars. Make sure none of your wiring is pinched between any of the fastening points. That's how you can end up with a short and a lot of problems. But get the screws, we'll put those all back in place. So you got your 3 fasteners, are all the same on this model. Very critical, you don't put, if you put too long of a screw in one of these fasteners, you might break the plastics, and that wouldn't be a good situation. So these are like a thread forming screw that originally came out of these 2 bosses. Get them all started. And we'll move on to the right side here and do the same. Let's see if I can even get that. And again, taking care, there's a lot of wiring right here. You don't want to have any of that wiring pinch. So you may need to pull the wiring out of the way. And don't need to go too tight. These are going into plastic. And then the last screw that holds the backside of the handlebars back on is kind of located kind of a little bit back there. So just go ahead. Get that one threaded in place, and that's pretty much it for this. And at this point, before I'd even put the headlight on, I'd make sure everything works. So turn the ignition on, turn signals are working, horn's nice and works good. The brake light's coming on, no problems. It starts. The high beam, low beam, you gotta put the headlight on and obviously start the scooter, but we could turn the headlights on and off. Clock's working. Of course, the mechanical speedometer cable's all hooked up, so I think we're scot-free at this point. So the appropriate screws for the front handlebar cover, there's those kind of coarse thread screws that go on the edge, and then there's more of a standard machine screw that's for the center. I want to make the single connection for the headlight. Make sure that clips in place. And we just go ahead and get this all snapped back into place. The top, you got to make sure everything up here kind of aligns and snaps into place. Sometimes it takes a little bit of effort to get it all to line up and click into place. And make a nice satisfying snap. There we go, looking good. Start with the center fastener. And we know we don't need to mess with anything in here, so the next step would be put the glove box on. We know it charges. We don't need to mess with the flasher relay or that headlight control relay. It's all working, so we're immobilizer's working. That's the reasons you would need to take that glove box off. So with the Vespa ET4s and LX, they do have this glove box latch assembly. It needs to go underneath this this trim ring that's around the ignition switch. So the best way to put this on is to hold this little latch up, and we're gonna pretty much rock get that lever underneath the switch. Because if you have it on the wrong side, the glove box latch isn't gonna work. And it takes a little bit of technique. You kind of gotta go up from the bottom and lift up. And then we're gonna get the glove box into this groove that goes all the way around the perimeter of the thing. And look at that, glove box latch is working, so you test that before you even start putting the screws in. You got 3 of these self-tapping or machine screws that have a step on them for the inside of the glove box. And just check your perimeter. This one fits really nice. And I always like to put that center fastener in there. Look at that, latch is working, so we're good so far. And it's better to use like a stubby short screwdriver. I'm kind of struggling with this longer screwdriver, but and here's the magical moment. Well, we could put this cover on, but let's see if this closes. Look at that, works perfect. So, and you got 2 more screws underneath the horn cover. So go ahead and put these 2 screws back into place before we put the little horn cover back on. And this thing needs quite a bit of dusting and cleaning. Look at how dirty that piece is, but we'll deal with cleaning the scooter a little later. and snap the badge in. Put the mirrors on and you pretty much have the scooters nearly ready. So for the next video, these tires still have good tread, but they are ancient. The date code on them is like 2008, I think, or maybe older than that. No, I think that's 1998 based on the date code. It's not 2008, that's 1998. So these are really, really old tires. And we'll go ahead and replace them. They still look pretty good, but in the interest of safety, it's always a good idea to replace the stems and the tires on the scooter. We know the wheel bearings aren't in pretty good shape, but that's something else to check out. But pretty much got all this back together, and hope you found that interesting. Look out for the next episode of resurrecting this old ET4. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Thanks for watching.